Empress Dowager Cixi, the woman who ruled China from behind the curtain. The Empress Dowager Cixi lived from the 29th of November 1835 until her death shortly before her 73rd birthday on the 15th of November 1908. She was from the Manchu Yehe Nara clan and effectively controlled the Chinese government during the late Qing dynasty as Empress Dowager and regent for almost 50 years. Selected as a concubine to the Xianfeng Emperor in her adolescence, she gave birth to a son, Zaichun, in 1856. After the death of the Xianfeng Emperor in 1861, his 5-year-old son, Zaichun, became the Tongzhi Emperor, and Cixi assumed the role of co-empress dowager alongside Xianfeng's widow, Empress Dowager Ci'an. Cixi ousted a group of regents appointed by the late emperor and assumed the role of regent alongside Ci'an. Cixi then consolidated control over the dynasty when she installed her nephew as the Guangxu Emperor upon the death of the Tongzhi Emperor in 1875, with Ci'an continuing as co-regent alongside her until Ci'an died in 1881. Cixi supervised the Tongzhi restoration, a series of moderate reforms, although she refused to adopt Western models of government. She supported technological and military reforms of the self-strengthening movement. However, Cixi supported the principles behind the 100 Days Reform of 1898, but feared the sudden implementation, as in her opinion it was too disruptive and would enable Japan and the European powers to take advantage of China. One result of the 100 Days Reform was that Cixi placed the Guangxu Emperor under house arrest for his support of those in favour of those reforms. During the Boxer Rebellion, Cixi initially backed the rebellion and declared war on the foreign armies. The ensuing defeat was a stunning humiliation for not only Cixi but the Qing administration, which was almost on the point of collapse at that time. Her death in 1908 left the conservatives governing a restless and deeply divided society. Life. Her birth name was Zaichun, and the girl who would later become known as Cixi was born on the 10th day of the 10th month, according to the lunar calendar, in the 15th year of the Guangxu Emperor's reign. Her father was Huizong, a member of the bordered blue banner, and held the title of a third-class duke. Huizong was working in Beijing when his daughter was born. Xianfeng era. In 1851, and known at that time as Lady Yehe Nara, she was chosen to be one of the few candidates among 60 for the role of wife to the Xianfeng Emperor. Among those chosen were noble Lady Li of the Tatara clan, who later became Consort Li, and eventually Imperial noble consort Zhuang Jing, and concubine Zhen of the Neo-Hara clan, who became Empress Consort and then later Empress Dowager Ci'an. On the 26th of June 1852, Lady Yehe Nara left her widowed mother's home and entered the Forbidden City, and was placed in the 6th rank of consorts and given the title Noble Lady Lan. Noble Lady Lan was elevated to the 5th rank of consorts and given the title Concubine Yi on the 28th of February 1854. The following year, she became pregnant and gave birth to Zaichun, Xianfeng's first and only surviving son. On the same day, April 27, 1856, she was elevated again to the 4th rank, and on her son's first birthday, she became Noble Consort Yi of the 3rd rank. This placed her behind only Empress Neo-Hara among the women in the emperor's harem. Unlike many of the women in the imperial household, Noble Consort Yi was able to read and write Chinese. This skill granted her numerous opportunities to assist the ailing emperor in the governing of the state on a daily basis. She would often read memorials for him and leave instructions on his behalf. As a result, she became well informed about the affairs of state and the art of governing. Tongzhi era. In September 1860, during the closing stages of the Second Opium War, the British diplomatic envoy Harry Parkes was arrested along with others, who were held hostage before being tortured and executed. In retaliation, British and French soldiers under the command of Lord Elgin attacked Beijing. During the assault on the city, the old summer palace was burnt to the ground. Xianfeng and his entourage, including noble consolidated, fled the city to Yehe province, which is close to present-day Chengde in Hebei province. On hearing the news of the destruction, Xianfeng, who was already showing signs of dementia, fell into a depression before becoming seriously ill. Xianfeng summoned 8 of his most senior ministers, who became known as the 8 regent ministers, to direct and support the future emperor. Xianfeng died on the 22nd of August 1861 at the Chengde mountain resort in Yehe province. Upon the death of the Xianfeng Emperor, his empress was elevated to the status of Empress Dowager. Her official title was Empress Dowager Ci'an, although she was often referred to as the East Empress Dowager because she lived in the eastern Songshui Palace. Noble consolidated was also elevated to Empress Dowager Cixi, and she was popularly known as the West Empress Dowager because she lived in the western Chuxiu Palace. Xinyoko, ousting Sushan. By the time of the death of Xianfeng, Empress Dowager Cixi had become an expert political strategist. In Yehe province, while waiting for a favourable time astrologically to transport the late emperor's body back to Beijing, Cixi had conspired with court officials and imperial relatives to seize power. Cixi's position as a lower-ranked Empress Dowager gave her no political power. In addition, her son, the young emperor, had at that age no political power himself. As a result, it became necessary for Cixi to ally herself with other powerful figures, including Empress Dowager Ci'an. Cixi suggested to Ci'an that they become co-reigning Empress Dowagers with powers exceeding that of the 8 appointed regents. The 2 women had been close friends since the time Cixi had first arrived within the imperial household. Tensions between the 8 regents, who were led by Sushan, and the 2 Empress Dowagers increased. The regents were not happy with Cixi's political interference in affairs of state, and the frequent confrontations left Ci'an so frustrated she preferred to avoid the royal court, leaving Cixi to deal with the ministers on her own. Cixi had been secretly gathering the support of other talented ministers, soldiers, and anyone that had been previously ostracized by the regents for political or personal reasons. Among those were 2 of the late emperor's brothers, Princes Gong and Shun. Prince Gong had been excluded from power, yet harbored great ambitions. While Cixi was aligning herself with the 2 princes, the idea that she rule from behind the curtain was raised. This was also interpreted as listening to politics from behind the curtain, or to assume power as a de facto ruler. At the same time, Prince Gong entered the political arena as a principal aide to the emperor. When it became time for Xianfeng's funeral procession to leave for Beijing, Cixi and her son, along with the 2 princes, left for the capital ahead of the remainder of the funeral party. By returning early, Cixi was able to plan with the princes to ensure the power base of Sushan and his allies became divided. In order to remove them from power, history was rewritten. 2 of the regents, Zaichun and Duanhua, were dismissed for having carried out incompetent negotiations with the Europeans. Allegedly, this incompetence had caused Xianfeng to flee the capital against his will. To display an act of high moral standards, Cixi had only 3 of the 8 regents executed. Prince Gong had suggested Sushan be executed by the most painful method of slow slicing, or death by 1,000 cuts. However, Cixi declined that method, preferring he was beheaded. The other 2 marked for execution, Zaichun and Duanhua, were each given a length of silk with which they could hang themselves. Cixi refused outright to execute family members of the regents, which would have been in accordance with Qing imperial tradition. Ironically, in a contradiction to imperial traditions, women and princes were not permitted to engage in politics. In breaking with this tradition, Cixi became the only Empress Dowager of the Qing dynasty to assume the role of regent while ruling from behind the curtain. Ruling from behind the curtain. In November 1861, shortly after the conclusion of the Xianfeng coup, Prince Gong was rewarded for his help in aiding Cixi. He was appointed Prince Regent, while his oldest daughter was made a first-rank princess, a title usually only given to the Empress's firstborn daughter. One of the first acts of ruling from behind the curtain was to issue 2 edicts on behalf of the boy emperor. The first of those imperial edicts made the 2 Empress Dowager the sole decision-makers without interference, while the second, of lesser importance, was to change the emperor's regnal title from Xiang to Tongzhi. Despite being the sole decision-makers, both Ci'an and Cixi were forced to rely on the Grand Council when dealing with affairs of state. The procedure required documents to be first forwarded to the Empress Dowager, then referred to Prince Gong and the Grand Council. Once discussions had taken place, the Prince and the Grand Council would then seek the instructions of the Empress's Dowager before imperial orders could be drawn up. Then drafts would be approved or not before any edicts could be issued. Cleaning up the bureaucracy. Cixi's ascendancy came at a time of internal chaos and foreign challenges. Both nationally and regional bureaucracy were infested with corruption. When in 1861, a year of official examinations, a time when officials at all levels presented their political reports for the previous 3 years, Cixi decided that was the time for a bureaucratic overhaul, requiring that all officials above the rank of provincial governor report directly to her. Cixi had 2 prominent officials executed to serve as an example to others. A number of reforms were implemented, including the modernization of railways, factories, arsenals, and an increase in industrial and commercial productivity. Taiping victory and Prince Gong. The victorious Xi'an army, under the command of Zheng Guofan, defeated the Taiping rebel army at Tianjin, or present-day Nanjing, in a hard-fought battle in July 1864. Zheng was awarded with the title of Marquis Yiyong, First Class, while his brother Zheng Guoquan and other officers that fought the rebels were given decorations and titles. With the threat from the rebels receding, Cixi focused her attention on new internal threats to her power. Of particular concern to her was the position of Prince Gong, who, as Prince Regent, had gathered the support of the majority of the remaining Han Chinese armies. Cixi removed Zaichun, a minor scribe official who had accused Prince Gong of corruption and shown disrespect to the emperor. Having built up a powerful base and network of allies, Prince Gong, however, considered the accusations as insignificant. Cixi, on the other hand, saw things differently and began the process of getting Prince Gong removed from his position of power. In April 1865, under the pretext that Prince Gong had improper court conduct before the 2 empresses, along with a series of other charges, the prince was removed from his offices and appointments, although he was allowed to retain his status as a noble. The dismissal surprised the nobility, and court officials brought about numerous petitions for the prince's return. Bowing to popular pressure, Cixi allowed Prince Gong to return but removed his title of Prince Regent. Prince Gong would never return to political prominence, and neither would the liberal and pro-reform policies of his time. Prince Gong's demotion revealed Cixi's iron grip on politics and her lack of willingness to give up absolute power to anyone, not even Prince Gong, her most important ally in the Xianfeng coup. Foreign influence. The defeat for China in the Second Opium War of 1856–60 was seen as a wake-up call. Until then, China's military strategies were outdated both on land and at sea, in addition to its weaponry. Sensing the immediate threat from foreign invaders and realizing that China's agricultural-based economy could not compete with the industrial powers of the West, Cixi decided that China would, for the first time, have to learn from the West and import their knowledge and technology. In 1862, Cixi decreed the opening of Tongwen Guan, a school for foreign languages in Beijing. In addition to the learning of languages such as English, French, and Russian, the school also taught astronomy and mathematics. Additionally, groups of boys were eventually sent to the USA for study-related purposes. Scholars sometimes attribute the failure of China's foreign program at that time to Cixi's conservative attitude and traditional methods of thinking. The reasoning was that Cixi would only learn so much from foreigners, provided it did not infringe upon her power. Upon the pretext that the railway was too loud and would disturb the emperor's tombs, Cixi forbade its construction. However, construction went ahead anyway in 1877. Cixi then requested the train be pulled by horse-drawn carts. She also refused to be driven by motor car, as the driver would be unable to lower himself in front of her as dictated by custom. Cixi was also alarmed by the people that had studied abroad, seeing that as another threat to her power. In 1881, she put a halt to the practice of sending children abroad to study and withdrew her formerly open attitude toward foreigners. Guangxu era. The sudden death of Empress Dowager Ci'an in April 1881 brought on a new challenge for Cixi. While Ci'an had shown little interest in running affairs of state, she had dealt efficiently with family affairs. As the Empress of the Xianfeng Emperor, she had seniority over Cixi, despite being 2 years younger than her. Rumors began circulating within the royal court that Cixi had poisoned Ci'an as a result of a personal conflict over the execution of a eunuch named Anne de Hay in 1869. Other rumors pointed to the will of the late emperor that issued everything to his Empress Ci'an. Due to a lack of evidence, historians are, however, reluctant to believe that Cixi poisoned Ci'an and chose to follow the official ruling that her cause of death was a sudden stroke. The Beiyang fleet was said to be the strongest navy in East Asia at that time, after it was developed under the instructions of Cixi. Before her nephew Guangxu took over upon her retirement in 1889, Cixi wrote explicit orders that the navy should continue to develop and expand. However, when Cixi went into retirement, all naval and military development ceased. The victories by Japan over China have often been falsely blamed on Cixi. Many believe that Cixi had been embezzling funds from the navy in order to build the new summer palace in Beijing after the original was destroyed by the British and French. The greatest symbol of the structure was a marble boat. However, after extensive research by Chinese historians, it was suggested that Cixi was not the cause of the Chinese Navy's demise. The reality was that the Guangxu Emperor's lack of interest in developing and maintaining the military caused China to be defeated. Grand Tutor Wang Tonghe, a close advisor to the emperor, advised Guangxu to cut all funding to the navy and army because he did not view Japan as a real threat. There were also a number of natural disasters during the 1890s, which the emperor thought were more urgent to have funds expanded upon. Cixi's retirement. On the 5th of March 1889, Cixi retired to serve as the effective head of the imperial family. However, many officials felt and showed more loyalty to the Empress Dowager than they did to the emperor. This was in part to her seniority and in part to her personalized approach to cultivating her favorites in court. Many of her favored officials would receive gifts such as artwork or invitations to accompany her for visits to the opera. Located in the Summer Palace, which was considered far enough away from the royal court to excuse her from attending court, Cixi continued to influence the decisions and actions of the Guangxu Emperor. Along with his entourage of court officials, Guangxu would visit her every 2 or 3 days to discuss major political decisions. While the emperor dealt with day-to-day administrative affairs, the Grand Councillors gave their advice on more complex cases. If these were not settled, they visited Cixi for her advice. 100 Days Reform. After defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894, the Guangxu Emperor launched the 100 Days Reform that aimed to bring sweeping political, legal and social changes. The abrupt reforms, however, came without building support at court or within the bureaucracy. Cixi, while officially retired, was concerned they would check her power, or fearful over the possibility of disorder, stepped in to prevent the reforms from pressing ahead. Some government and military officials warned Cixi that the reforms were geared towards conspiracy, with allegations of treason levelled against the emperor, in addition to suspected Japanese influence within the reform movement. These concerns led to Cixi resuming the role of regent and taking control once again of the royal court. On the 21st of September 1898, the Manchu general Ronglu took the emperor to Ocean Terrace, a small palace on Yingtai Island in the middle of Zhongnan. Cixi followed this by issuing an edict that proclaimed Guangxu's total disgrace and his being unfit to continue as emperor. Guangxu's reign, while it continued, effectively came to an end at that point. The Guangxu era nominally continued until his death in 1908, but the emperor lost all respect, power and privileges, including his freedom of movement. Most of his supporters, including his political mentor Kang Yuwei, fled into exile, and the 6 prominent reformers, including Tan Zitong and Kang's younger brother, were publicly beheaded. Kang continued to work for a constitutional monarchy while in exile, remaining loyal to Guangxu and hoping eventually to restore him to power. His efforts would prove to be in vain. Returned to Beijing amid dramatic reforms. In January 1902, the Imperial Royal Court, led by Cixi, returned to Beijing after the self-imposed exile in Xi'an during the Boxer Rebellion. As the royal procession proceeded through the city from Beijing railway station to the Forbidden City, onlookers watched in amazement. It was the first time commoners had been permitted to watch such a parade. Ironically, once back in the palace, Cixi implemented sweeping political reforms, many of which were modelled on reforms of the Meiji Restoration in Japan. Cixi sponsored the implementation of these reforms, dubbed the New Policies, which were more radical than the policies that she had been so opposed to during the 100 Days Reform. In another twist, during the Boxer Rebellion, Cixi had been vehemently anti-foreign in her thinking. Now, she was openly attempting to woo foreigners, even inviting wives of diplomats to attend tea ceremonies in the Forbidden City. Death of the Empress Dowager and the desecration of her tomb. Cixi died on the 15th of November 1908 after having Puyi installed as a new emperor the previous day after the death of the Guangxu Emperor. Her death came less than 24 hours after the death of Guangxu, and radicals greeted her death with scorn. The anarchist Wu Zihui, who had levelled some of the most vitriol at Cixi during her lifetime, wrote from exile in Paris of the vixen empress and vermin emperor, and that their lingering stench makes me vomit. Empress Dowager Cixi was interred amongst the eastern Qing tombs 125 kilometers east of Beijing in the Eastern Ding Mausoleum, along with the Empress Dowager Ci'an. In 1895, Cixi, unsatisfied with her tomb, ordered its destruction and reconstruction. The new complex was one of temples, gates and pavilions covered with gold leaf, gold and gilded bronze ornaments hung from beams and the eaves. In July 1928, the warlord Sun Dianying raided the tomb during the looting of the Eastern Mausoleum. The complex was methodically stripped of its precious ornaments before the entrance to the burial chamber was opened using dynamite. The coffin was opened, with the remains thrown on the ground. Puyi ordered that Cixi's remains be reburied. Sun Dianying claimed the desecration was revenge for the death of his ancestor Sun Chengzong in 1638. Legacy. Historians both in China and abroad have debated Cixi's legacy. Historians have argued that she was a ruthless despot with reactionary policies, although successful in managing to prolong the ailing Qing dynasty led to its humiliation and eventual downfall in the 1911 revolution. However, revisionist chroniclers have suggested that reformers and revolutionaries scapegoated her for deep-rooted problems which were beyond salvaging, and allowed her perchance for moderate reform, including the founding of Peking University and Beiyang Army, and maintenance of political order in an era of destabilizing European colonialism. That brings us to the end of this video, highlighting the life of the Empress Dowager Cixi. Her life was a life within the higher echelons of the Chinese society of the late 19th and early years of the 20th century that contributed greatly to the development of China that we see today. If you've enjoyed watching and it's shown you a little detail of life and events here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link to the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.